Hi, I'm Bill Carmody, and I'm the Marketing Whisperer. Today on my program, I am happy to have Sanjiv Gajiwala, if I said that name right, who is the head of marketing for Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Sanjiv, how are you doing?
Great. How are you, Bill?
Excellent. So, Sanjeev, one of the most amazing things, the first time that I met you in your office in Chicago, you had said something that really got my attention, which is that you have worked really hard to put together a ability to look at all of the content and the marketing that you're doing digitally and how it drives into retail sales. And so today I really want to focus on that because there's a lot of people I think who would love to understand what you've done and how you're looking at sort of the content that's driving sales in physical retail channels.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to talk about that.
Cool. So start off, you told me just a little bit about the fact that you're using an Oracle backend. So let's just start at a high level. So generally speaking, consumers are looking at your content through social channels like Facebook. And how are you then correlating and connecting the dots between the content they're consuming to the actual purchases that are being made?
Yeah, it's actually really awesome. We work with Oracle and their data provider, Datalogics, which actually looks at our Facebook ads and the users that are exposed to the Facebook ads, and connects that back to their credit card and purchase behavior. So Datalogics has a way of matching users to their actual purchasing, and what we've really been able to learn from that has been incredible because we also do, we've got like a sort of a social listening ecosystem
Sure.
where we're looking at brand health and we're looking at what people are saying, but it helps us complete the picture with their purchase behavior. And so we've learned some really incredible things, such that people that are exposed to our ads that are Mike's users are spending 5% more.
Wow, that's
In
great.
terms of the lift in actual dollar sales we're getting from that exposure, and then you connect that back to 84% of people exposed to Facebook ads on Mike's definitely would or are very interested in purchasing Mike's after seeing the ad or our content that we're promoting. And you start to see both of those numbers start to sync up. And it really helps validate what we're seeing in sort of the soft data versus the actual through the register data.
So tell me, so that's great. That's a great foundation. So what's fascinating to me is this with Datalogics working with Oracle, what you're able to do is you're looking at the Facebook ads, you're looking at sort of the content marketing that's being pushed out through Facebook and other social channels. And what you're able to do then is discern these transactions that occurred at these retail stores. They made a purchase, and that purchase decision then tracks back to the actual content or advertising that you displayed. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay,
Exactly.
so I love that, and that's, by the way, that's fantastic. Most of the people that I've talked to in the past, the only way they're able to even look at that is usually through some sort of a study with Nielsen Catalina Solutions or through some sort of a shopper card data. What I love the fact is that you can actually do this directly through the credit card. That sort of opens you up. So my next question is, are you able to do that through all retail stores or specific ones?
It's tied more to the credit card issuer and the data provider than it is the actual retail store, because that's where we're getting the information from.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's actually how we're thinking about it. And
So to that end, like, are you then able to look at this on an account basis and sort of look at specific accounts that are doing better than others, or really it's more aggregate from the consumer side?
unfortunately, it's aggregated at the consumer side. I mean, fortunately for the consumer, but it's aggregated at the consumer level. So what we are able to do, though, is instead of looking at retailers, we can then actually look at segments of our consumers between heavy, medium, and light users and
Nice.
better understand what type of content and what kind of behaviors we can expect from that different type of consumer, which I think has great possibilities for us as we think about expanding Mike's and its marketplace, with more consumers.
I love that. Now, what about actually the any geography data? Are you getting that from Facebook side, or are you getting that from the Datalogic side, Oracle side?
We're looking mostly at the geography data from the Facebook side,
Okay.
or sorry, the Oracle side.
Yeah.
The Facebook side data is really being put into, I mean, Datalogics and Oracle is doing sort of all of the machinations behind, obviously, but they are offering us some geographic and penetration data as well.
Okay, so well, then I asked that question because one of the things you start to look at is who are your heaviest users, who are the people that are using your products the most, favorite profiles of flavors, things like that. And then that should be able to allow you to then line that up geography and say, okay, we know in the Northwest, for example, we have a different type of trend set. Maybe it's a different flavor profile, maybe it's a different level of user than, say, on the East Coast, right? So you can start to look at sort of what matches up and where you need to spend more money from a marketing marketing perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And what's really been interesting is actually the Oracle work has validated like we're heavily penetrated in the Northwest or we're heavily penetrated in the Northeast, and we're seeing within the consumer segmentation the heavier penetrated people in those regions where we're most heavily penetrated. So it's actually forced us to look a little bit more closely at why is someone in the Northwest more interested in flavored malt beverage, and what's the foundational difference regionally between the Northwest and the Southwest, and how does that change our communication strategy as well?
That's awesome. And so I mean, this to me, this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be talking to you, because it really, everybody's been talking about the promise of big data and sort of the analytics behind it and all those things. But oftentimes we find that to be siloed. So you find out like, okay, well, I know exactly what's going on with social media. I know how many people are clicking, how many people are engaging, sharing, and commenting. But then when I basically look at my sales data, it's typically completely in a separate silo. So it's like I look at what's happening specifically within a retail account, or I look exactly what kind of volume is being moved. But being able to marry those things together gives you all kinds of new insights to say, okay, what is the correlation between the advertising dollars we're spending and the actual sales lift we're achieving? What is sort of some of the nuance in terms of where else in the US we should be focusing on our investments, and how we might be able to grow the category in some of the areas that maybe aren't as strong in some places, right?
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Your last one is absolutely spot on, which is we actually through this work uncovered that there was a whole group of people that profile-wise were like our Mike's heavy users that we weren't reaching. They were heavy FMB users, but they weren't really engaging with Mike's. And it was like, now it actually led to an incremental investment in our social strategy that said, we're going to target our existing consumers, but here's how we're going to target this other group. And we can expect and then track back to say, you know, with this shifted strategy to try to penetrate this group, are we seeing the same lifts from them? And so our prospecting and our farming strategies are both different on social, but just as measurable. And I think what really gives us that ability, and I think is cool, is, you know, with big data and with data, we're pretty small, our team, and we're really nimble, and everybody's accountable for the data.
Right.
And there's opportunities to collaborate and communicate. And it's really about getting, you know, the channel insights group talking to the social group and getting them to see where that data can overlap, and that's what's allowed us to uncover some of those.
I love it. And you've also, you know, one of the things I most admire about Mike's Hard Lemonade, and there's a lot of things I admire, but one of the things I admire is that you guys are also very quick to test different strategies. And so we were early on in pioneering in Snapchat. And so one of the things I'm interested in is, does this also help you correlate some of the activities you've done in Snapchat with also some of the sales buying behaviors? Were you able to make those jumps as well?
Unfortunately, no, because the date, you know, we were one of the first alcohol beverage partners to work with Snapchat last year with a custom filter, which helped us learn a lot for how we activated this year. But unfortunately, the robustness of the data is not as strong as it is on the Facebook platform.
Fair enough.
That said, we've really seen from a geographic use of filters, which is how we're using Snapchat filters now on a geographic basis. We're able to then look at what's going on in the 1 week and 2 week lifts in those retailers when we're activating these filters, which gives us a bit of a controlled test environment.
Well, that's good, though, because basically you're sort of early pioneering what's going on within Snapchat. And today you're using that sort of, you know, more directional data, understanding sort of how those filters are showing up in those geographies and how those geographies are doing from a sales list perspective. But what that means is you sort of have a foundational step that basically once Snapchat starts to catch up to Facebook and some of those other data areas, you should be able to make those direct correlations.
Yeah, I mean, that's our hope is by being early adopters and by partnering with the platforms, we'll get to a place quicker than most. And then at the same time, we're asking the questions that they don't yet have answers to, which means they're going to go try to find those answers. And I think that really helps us in the long run, and I think helps drive ROI for not just us, but, you know, hopefully marketers as a whole.
You know, that's great. Tell me one other thing too, is alcohol in particular is very challenging as the distributor segmentation. You know, you've got like 450 distributors that you're appeasing and working through. Has this data helped you as you have these, you know, sort of sales meetings and conversations with your dealer, you know, distributors, sorry, working through sort of growth and strategies and things like that? Have you been able to leverage some of the data from Data Logic and Oracle to sort of help sort of roadmap and show sort of where the growth are and things that are happening there?
Absolutely. I mean, we were, you know, as we talked about, we were one of the first alcohol beverage brands that of scale to say we're only going to focus on digital and social media, and that's going to be our priority from a marketing
It's
standpoint.
huge.
You can imagine distributors and retailers really cautious and still skeptical, like a lot of people are still skeptical. So having that data coupled with the trends that we've had, so that they're like, oh, well, you can do anything in a data set, but the trends and the data have matched up, and we've created some believers, I'd like to think.
Well, and has that carried on, especially from like when you do new product launches, like White Claw, for example? You know, as you're sort of looking at that, have you really continued to drive a lot of that initial awareness advertising? I know you're doing some television advertising too, but have you primarily stayed in digital, social, to basically push out some of these new product launches?
Yeah, I mean, we are digital first across all our brands now.
Awesome.
So with White Claw, we're spending and investing heavily in Instagram. We're doing a really cool program using Snapchat where there's a special White Claw fitness filter that's available anytime a consumer is near a gym.
That's
So
awesome.
we've taken in-gym advertising beyond just like what you see there, but as people are sharing their workout life, White Claw can be a part of that. So that learning around how we can use geo-targeting on Snapchat came from our work on mics, and we're able to apply it immediately to an innovation in a really interesting way. So that kind of innovation and that kind of investment in digital is something we're going to always do.
So talking to your CPG brothers and sisters out there who have struggled with digital and understanding sort of how to really maximize digital effectiveness driving into retail, are there any sort of tips or insights that, based on having this data, based on understanding what's worked and what hasn't worked, are there some things you can share that would sort of identify best practices or things you've learned, whether it's Snapchat or Facebook, that has really helped with what works well driving actual sales at retail?
Yeah, I would say like the core one, I would say, we started out, I think, like a lot of companies, which is let's try to learn everything we possibly can and collect all the data we can.
Yep.
And then we'll make decisions. But I think the core was, what are the key questions we want to answer? And then let's just go find the data that answers that, which is what made that Oracle partnership for us so impactful, because it wasn't like we were trying to solve every problem at once.
Right.
And then the second piece of it was, I don't think enough people are segmenting their fan base and the entire population of Facebook in a meaningful way. So the work that we've done to identify heavy, light, and core users within our million-plus fans that like us actually helps us understand that group in a meaningful way based on purchase. Because on Facebook, a like is a like is a like, but you can't really identify those super users unless you take that extra step.
Yeah.
And I think that's really changed how we think about our Facebook strategy, because we started, when we talked 2 years ago, saying we're just going to focus on this core group of people that like us, and that's worked. But within that exploration, we learned that there's a heavy group that likes us. That's awesome. But there's this entirely other heavy group that doesn't like us that we need to figure out how to reach. And by profiling, we're able to identify them in a much more clear way. And it's changed how our strategy. And I think,
and to that end, I spent a lot of time with talking about the customer journey, and I'm sure you do too. And clearly from a discovery perspective and that sort of initial piece, you've really nailed it from an advertising and engagement perspective. You've taken them through engagement and now transaction. Talk to me a little bit about advocacy, that sort of final piece of this. How are you creating advocates and continuing to maintain advocacy for Mike's Hard Lemonade?
The word of mouth measures we use on brand health are the second most important metric for us beyond purchase, right? Because that's what advocacy is, and that's what makes social media so powerful. So we're measuring that on a regular basis, and that's been part of our content strategy.
Mm-hmm.
At the segments of consumers, we look at our engagements per post, and then we map that back to brand health measures on advocacy, which help us understand what content drives word of mouth and shares and engagements. And then that's the content we're going to focus on with that group of consumers.
That's awesome. And so now, based on that sort of advocacy, once you've identified who their biggest advocates are and sort of who's really engaging with you in that way, are there particular things that you're leveraging to sort of draw them out and continue to sort of help stoke that fire? In other words, are there techniques that you've found to work really effective on sort of highlighting your most highest engaged fans, people who are most advocate about you? What is it that they really crave from Mike's Hard Lemonade that really has helped put gasoline on the fire?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the thing that has been most successful, it's been something we've been able to do because we've built our own internal production studio.
Yep.
Is that they love being rewarded by mics on content. So one of the things we did last year is we had this fan who was just a huge fan of one of our old flavors. And we took the time and effort to recreate one of our old flavors for her and hand deliver a 6-pack.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
And produced and made a video of us bringing her favorite flavor again. And she loved it so much that she took that post and she shared it with all her friends and has become such an advocate that she now shares and likes every single one of our posts. So
That's awesome.
Just a real simple, small thing where we just drove a 6-pack to a friend, helped do that. And so all of our programming and our sort of what I would call our tentpole social is about how we can recognize fans. It's less about us, and it's more about finding those super fans and celebrating them.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite brands early on in social media was Dunkin' Donuts, and Dunkin' Dave used to do that every day. And one of the things I loved of that was they sort of created this sort of fan of the day, and they would highlight and pull someone out, or they'd have like, hey, take a picture with Dunkin' and something else, and then basically highlight those pictures all ongoing. I think your point is so spot on, that simple gestures, especially when it comes to content, it's not going to take you a lot of time and energy. It's not necessarily cost you a bunch of money, but it's taking the time to acknowledge those people who are your biggest fans, who are supporting you every day. It's like just having that sort of connection builds a tighter community and lets people know you're listening and you're participating, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, because social is, as you said, is a community. It's about a conversation. And if you're just focused on pushing out your own message, you're not actually in the conversation. And I think you can't forget that in the social platforms at all. And you can't forget what each platform is for. I've heard a couple people from Snapchat and Facebook and Twitter speak, and when you hear someone at Snapchat say Snapchat is where best friends come to share their feelings, then you have to think about how a brand can be a part of that conversation
authentically, right? And not spammy.
And if Twitter is where I go to learn information, how am I going to contribute and talk? Which means you really have to have you can't post the same content on all 4 channels. You have to think about them individually, and you have to think about spending the time and resource to do so.
That's great. Well, and I guess that leads me to my next question, which is, as marketers who have limited budgets and trying to figure out where they invest their time, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is they try to go after every single platform and they do them all poorly. I think one of the things that is successful, you guys have done very well, is you've been very myopic, specifically with platforms like Facebook, like Snapchat, and taken the time to really understand how you can add value to the community. And before jumping into all the rest of the platforms, you've kind of really gone through and knocked some of those things out. I really appreciate that you guys taking the time to do that,
I mean, I understand being outspent by larger competitors, right? We get outspent 10, 15 to 1 by our larger competitors. So we have to be as thoughtful. And we've really taken, to say, is this a new platform? Do we understand how it works? Do we know that we have a meaningful role to play here? And does that fit our brand? And then let's go create great content for it. That doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be thoughtful. And then whatever we do with purpose, we need to be supportive of. So I think there's a lot of people that are like, I'm going to tweet, 10 times in a day. But that's less effective than saying I'm going to tweet once a week, but I'm going to support it.
Right.
And when you have that sort of strategy where you're thoughtful about it, I think you can be very successful on social.
So, one of the other things too is there's so many technologies that continue to come out of the woodworks, and especially as people who are driving marketing and brands today are inundated with the latest and greatest. Hey, you should try this, you should try that. How have you filtered out the noise and really looked for those gems or the hidden gems that are maybe the next platform you should be paying attention to, or a technology that you really do think could be useful? Like, how are you sifting through all that noise to get to the real outcomes you want?
I mean, that's a daily challenge for us because there is so much stuff. And I think, one of the things I'm always skeptical of are marketing automation when it comes to social, which is social is inherently personal. So to automate something, social is weird to me. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But, we spend a lot of time listening, learning, the teams, we're constantly at conferences, constantly engaging with people, and ideas can come from anywhere, and I think we're very democratic about that, and I think you have to, because you can't solve the questions yourself.
That's great. Sanjiv, I really want to thank you for taking your time with me here today. Before we wrap up, is there anything particular you want to talk to the audience about? Is there anything you want to mention or plug before we wrap up here?
Well, I mean, if you don't already, please like Mike's Hard Lemonade on Facebook and on Instagram. But I think alcohol beverage is a really interesting, challenging category because in addition to the distributors, there's actually 3,000 counties with 3,000 different sets of rules on the
Wow.
market alcohol beverage. So, understanding that this is an evolving space, explaining and being transparent about what we do is really important
Yes.
because a lot of regulators that think we're up to no good.
Yes.
And so that transparency is really important. I encourage people to share, talk, and continue to explain what's going on so that everybody feels better about what we're doing here.
That's awesome. Sanjiv, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill.